In an article titled Habits Matter More Than You Might Think, author Rebecca Strong talks about some of the benefits of creating a new habit. Things like a sense of achievement, boosted self-esteem, and a reduction in stress and anxiety. So if you decide that it's time for you to start exercising or sleeping better, just know that a new habit is good for you. The article also talks about some tips to help you maintain those habits. Things like make it realistic. If you don't have the time for an hour-long workout every day, make it 20 minutes instead. Make it as convenient as possible. If you want to drink more water, fill up your water bottle the night before. Cheer yourself on. Coming up with small ways to celebrate small wins will help keep you motivated. Use the buddy system. Partnering up with someone who wants to incorporate the same habit can help hold you accountable. There you have it. So for all of you out there who are trying to start a new habit, hopefully this helps. Another area where you and I can develop habits is when it comes to our faith. There are intentional things that we can do. Things like praying, studying the Bible, worshiping, serving, memorizing scripture, or talking about Jesus, just to name a few. I call these faith habits. These are practices and disciplines that you and I can incorporate into the rhythm of our lives to help build our faith. Now, I realize that no one gets really pumped hearing words like discipline, but unlike budgeting or drinking more water, our faith habits are all about a relationship. The whole point is for us to get to know Jesus better. When you think about it, we already have habits and practices that help us know the people around us better. If you were in a small group or Bible study with someone and got to know them by being in the same place once a week, then you grew closer relationally through a relational discipline. If you and a friend grew closer by connecting on the phone or meeting for coffee regularly, then you experienced the power of a relational habit. When you think about almost all the people in life who you're close to, it started simply because you were around each other. Maybe you and your best friend immediately struck up a great friendship out of the gate. Maybe you and your spouse didn't even like each other when you first met, but eventually you just spend time around each other. You hung out, and then over time, your relationship grew closer and stronger. All because there was a point in time when you were just in the same place at the same time for extended periods of time, getting to know each other better. See, knowing Jesus and growing in faith is a lot like knowing anyone else. You can learn a lot about them, but they still surprise you every now and then. They aren't puzzles to be solved or textbooks to be read. They're people to hang out with. Knowing God and growing in faith is the same way. It's about a relationship. A relationship takes intentional time and effort. Now, let's be clear. Faith habits like praying and serving aren't requirements, they're gifts. We sometimes think that just like it's required by law for us to pay taxes, it's required by God for us to read our Bibles. No, this is about knowing Jesus. It's simply about having a relationship. Think about some of the ways we build a relationship. We talk on the phone. We meet for coffee. We share what's going on in our lives. We ask questions. We laugh together. We work through problems. In short, relationships take time and commitment. And these habits can be applied to our relationship with God. In this series, we've defined faith as having trust, hope, and confidence in Jesus. And we've talked about how when our faith grows, our lives look different. Today, we're going to finish by talking about what it looks like to develop some good faith habits. And to do that, we're going to take a look at an amazing guy from the Old Testament named Daniel. Some of you may have grown up hearing the story of Daniel and the lion's den. I grew up hearing the story a lot, but I never knew the details surrounding it. Daniel was born and raised in a prominent Jewish family. As a teenager, he was smart and high achieving. But then his country was overthrown and destroyed by an enemy army. He and the rest of the Jewish people were ripped from their homeland and taken as prisoners to a foreign country. Most of them would never return home again. Daniel and a handful of his friends were chosen to train in the culture of the new kingdom. But despite all of that, Daniel made a decision to remain committed to God. At this point, it wasn't about requirement. It wasn't about keeping all the Jewish rules. It wasn't about him being a well-behaved church kid. No, he needed God's help for his survival. He needed God's hope to keep from losing his. It was about his faith in a God he was in a relationship with. In Daniel chapter 6, we see that a king named Darius had promoted Daniel to a very high, powerful government position. Daniel was doing so well, in fact, that other politicians started getting jealous and decided to try and take him down. Here's what the Bible tells us. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God." This was incredible. Daniel stood out. He lived differently and people noticed. How was he able to demonstrate this type of character in public? We'll find out in just a minute. But first, did you notice that since the politicians couldn't find any fault or corruption in the way Daniel did his job, they decided to go after his faith? The passage goes on to describe a plan they came up with. They went to King Darius and said, "Hey, King, we have an idea of national importance. For the next 30 days, we suggest that people can only pray to you. And if they don't, well, let's feed them to the lions." It sounds crazy, but the king actually agreed to this plan. So the king issued the decree. If you pray to someone else, you're a dead man. And when Daniel found out, this is how he responded. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. Another translation says, he prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. The other politicians knew they could trap Daniel if they went after his faith habit of praying. This was clearly a regular part of his life, long before he found himself in this dilemma. And it explains why Daniel lived such an upright life. He had character out in public because of the faith he had developed in private. Daniel modeled for us that big faith starts with small steps. Daniel's powerful faith was built in the moments of his carving out time to pray, making a decision to obey God and refusing to follow the culture around him. He took step after step, and it all added up to a massive faith. And this wasn't about Daniel fulfilling a requirement. Notice how it said the men found Daniel asking God for help. Daniel prayed because he needed God's help and wisdom in his leadership position, because he needed God's hope and comfort in a foreign land far away from his family. He needed courage and strength to stand strong, especially when jealous people were looking for his downfall. This is one of the many reasons why you and I build habits of faith, to prepare us for what we'll face in the future, so that we can persevere through trials when we face them, so that we can find peace in the tough times, so that we can resist temptation when it shows up, so that we can love others well, even when they are difficult to love. We start with small steps now so that we can have big faith later. We can follow Daniel's example. If you're facing difficult circumstances right now, you can do what Daniel did. You can start asking God for help. If you're not facing difficulty right now, you can do what Daniel did. You can start the habit of praying before you face difficulties in the future. You can start developing your faith muscles right now. To wrap up the story, we read that the other politicians went and told on Daniel. Then they said to the king, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day." Daniel had a daily faith habit, but it wasn't just some common habit. It wasn't some requirement. In fact, with that decree, the opposite was required. This was about a relationship with God, a relationship that meant so much to Daniel that he was willing to give up his life for it. Daniel was living for something, for someone bigger than this life. His life had a bigger perspective. Daniel went on to face the lion's den and miraculously lived. He had big faith, and we're still talking about him today. Here's one last verse that I think captures the heart of how Daniel lived. In chapter 10, an angel visited Daniel and said this, "Don't be afraid," he said, "for you are very precious to God. Peace. Be encouraged. Be strong." As he spoke these words to me, I suddenly felt stronger and said to him, "Please speak to me, my Lord, for you have strengthened me." Look at the relational aspect of this. Daniel was very precious to God. Well, guess what? So are you. He knows your name. You are precious to him. He knows what you're struggling with and going through. And just like he helped Daniel feel stronger, he wants to strengthen you too. This is an ancient story, but the truth is the same for us today. Big faith starts with small steps. And here are 2 steps we can take today. First, make a decision in your heart. Long before Daniel faced the lion's den, he made a decision to follow God. I invite you to make that same decision today. You can say, "God, faith is good, and I want to have a big, vibrant faith. I'm committing that to you and before you today." And then begin building a faith habit. When it comes to getting to know God, you just have to be around him. Go for a walk and talk to him. Spend some time reading his word and journaling. Listen to some worship songs and worship him. You don't have to meet a bunch of requirements and get everything just right. You just have to get in some time with him. Even when you don't feel like something is happening, your intentionality is moving you somewhere. So keep taking small steps. Daniel's life wasn't easy, not even a little bit. He faced a lot of tough circumstances, but he still lived a big, full, abundant life. Why? Because he cherished his relationship with God, and he invested in that relationship habitually. We can do the same, knowing that big faith starts with small steps.